Hello, my name is Maddy Osman, and today I'm going to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, writing for humans and robots, the new rules of content style. So let's go ahead and get to it. So I run the Blogsmith, which is a data-driven content agency for B2B technology brands. I'm also the author of the forthcoming book, Writing for Humans and Robots. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is basically lifted from my book. So I think we go through about 4 different chapters, some of the content within them, and then there are 22 chapters total. So if you really like what I'm talking about today, I would suggest checking out the book and reading the remaining chapters. So let's go ahead and get started. I have these slides available. If you go to that Twitter handle in the bottom right-hand corner at Maddy Osman, you'll be able to access them, follow along, and reference them again if you want to return to this topic in the future. Before we get into some of the details here, you might be wondering, why am I speaking about this topic in particular? So my journey to where I'm at now and where a lot of these things come into play is that I started as a freelance writer, and I just, enjoyed the process of writing, the creativity that went into it, working with different clients, and ultimately connecting that SEO piece where I was able to help clients reach their ideal target audience in search through this creative but also business writing that I was doing. But I realized that I was hitting a limit in terms of what I would be able to do on my own as a freelance writer, one-woman show. And so that's where I started to think about the future and how could I expand my business? How could I scale content without sacrificing quality or consistency? Because at the end of the day, whether I'm a freelancer or an agency, I'm still the face behind the brand. I'm still the name behind the brand, and it has to be representative of me. So in order to do that, I decided to create my own style guide, something that I expected any writer that worked with me, any editor that worked with me to follow. And so I started growing my agency, growing my business. It really started with virtual assistants when I was a freelance writer. And they helped me with things like different admin tasks, doing research. They helped me prepare outlines, doing the research for them, doing things like graphic design and other sort of behind the scenes things so that it wasn't all on me to take care of all the details. But eventually I kind of hit the limit of where I was going to get with people who were not specialized in writing. And so at that point, I decided to hire some writers where I was essentially their editor. And so the Blogsmith style guide that I created based on AP style, taking a lot of inspiration from AP style, came from that sort of in between where I was starting to scale up. I started to work with writers, but I really needed next to hire some editors so that it wasn't all on me to do that, and so that I could focus on more of like the growth aspects of running an agency, the business development, bigger picture things. And so that's really where the Blogsmith style guide came from. I created it in tandem with our first editor, and basically she and I collaborating to figure out what my style even is and documenting the things that we were frequently finding in writers' work that, we didn't want to have to continue editing for day in and day out. So then, I eventually got to a point working with this editor where I felt comfortable hiring some more editors and then hiring more writers and scaling up all these other parts of the business, because I knew and I felt confident that with the style guide, we could confidently create high quality content at scale, consistent formatting, consistent approach to headings, links, images, you name it. Really the style guide is just a working document. It started at a certain spot. It has since grown to being much larger. I think the current iteration is maybe close to 30 pages, so it is no small thing. But essentially with this Blogsmith style guide established, I was able to scale the business. So you've probably heard a couple things from me by now as to why having a style guide is important, but let me summarize these things here for the sake of anybody else who might be on the fence about creating one for their brand or even for their client projects across several brands to be consistent in how you're delivering for those different clients. So why bother with proper style? For me, it was getting the team on the same page, those writers, those editors working together. Also, whenever I hire some new writers or editors, getting them quickly up to speed in terms of what our expectations are. And as a result, this helps us to reduce time spent on edits, which, as you can imagine, working with many different clients across multiple different content pieces over time really translates to tens or hundreds of hours of saved time going over the same things if they weren't documented style rules. So then it's about demonstrating professionalism and expertise around content publishing thanks to this consistency. I think that if we were to send content to clients that looked different, whether it was a discernible difference or not, there's something to say about establishing trust by being consistent and showing up the same way in different content pieces, obviously covering different topics, but in a way where the formatting, the visual, the flow matches that of what else is on their blog. And then I think bothering with proper style also comes down to effectively reaching your target audience, because there are certain aspects of style. One that we'll talk about today is voice and tone. And to be able to effectively reach your target audience, you have to speak to them in a language that makes sense. And in defining voice and tone, as one example, that is a way to reach that target audience. Another thing that I believe we're talking about today too is things like readability and making sure that you're matching that reading level to your target audience and what they're expecting in the content they consume. So we'll dig into all those things. But who are these guidelines for? You might have recognized yourself in some of the different decision makers or team members that I've already mentioned: writers, editors, clients. Maybe you're a freelance writer who works with clients and you just want to have a consistent approach. It's also a matter of working with content managers and other sort of like in-house content team members. So that's with the Blogsmith. Frequently, we work with companies who have at least one person, maybe a team in-house, and we basically exist to help them scale up or scale down, basically meet the demand that they have each month as that changes. And then, maybe you're neither one of those people, but maybe you yourself are a creator who makes content for your own project. And you just, again, want to have a consistent approach to how you're doing that. And style rules just are one of the most effective ways to ensure that you're creating that consistency and then that trust with the end audience that you're trying to reach. So in case it's not already clear, what is a brand style guide? This is my definition. It's a reference for your writers and editors and clients who might be curious how you get to where you end up, that they can use to understand how and why to do things a certain way on behalf of the brand, which means that different brands can have different style guides. We've already talked about AP style. So AP style is like news journalism style. It's one of the most, I would say, probably frequently referenced style guides, especially for people who are writing for the internet, because a lot of the things that people write for the internet are timely in nature, which news journalism is. That being said, AP style doesn't fully capture all of the nuance of writing for the web, which is why we created the Blogsmith style guide, and why brands themselves create their own style guides as well. So let's talk about what content mediums benefit from consistent style rules. The answer is like all of them, especially all the ones that you see here. And this is really, again, just addressing sort of that internet content area versus like, printed books or print of any kind and things like that, or even like TV. All those things probably have their own style guides too. But I would say that one style guide could probably address all of these things. That being said, you might want to have some nuance for different things. For example, when we talk about social media content versus blog content, on social media, you might be using hashtags. There might be a character count limit. There might be certain visuals that you associate with your brand, like maybe you use GIFs, maybe you don't though. And it's useful to define your brand, how it engages on something like social media versus, something else like maybe an email sequence, a newsletter to your customers, to your customer list. It just has a little bit of a different nuance. And so you might have one style guide that addresses all these things, or you might have some nuanced style guides that sort of are, the children of that parent style guide. The Blogsmith, we definitely have a separate social media style guide. I wouldn't say at this point we've gone into all of these other things in so much detail. Our style guide more or less covers those things, and then we create process documentation around how to cover the nuance when taking on these different kinds of projects. So the title of my book and the topic of this presentation today is writing for humans versus robots. And so I want to explain what I mean by that. Humans are sort of this ultimate buyer of whatever you're selling. So they respond to empathy. They respond to like you being a human, you trying to reach them as a human. Whereas robots are another important user or reader of your content. They act as the medium that connects users with your content, and thus they respond to descriptiveness and intent matching, search intent. So it's important to understand here that robots can't buy whatever it is you're selling. We are not trying to appeal to them. We are only trying to loop them in a way that they can understand so that they can serve up your content to these humans that are empathetic and that actually have bank accounts and they can buy things. At the end of the day, we never want to put the robot first. So I want to make that very clear. The robot's not first. We optimize for the human over anything. But this book, this topic is all about sort of marrying the needs of both, so that you can show up where people are looking for you. And it's also probably worth mentioning, I'm mostly talking about Google search engine spiders here. But that being said, robots can also take the form of like a social media platform's news algorithm. Some of these GPT-3 tools that you've seen come out. There are different robots that we're talking about, but primarily we're talking about those that index content on Google or any of the other search engines, but mostly Google. So how to write for humans and robots. Let's go through some of these specifics here. And we're going to start with word choice because I honestly think that's one of the most important things that I've talked about in this presentation or in the book. So we talked about this already, defining voice and tone. We just haven't dug into it yet. So the Nielsen-Norman group has 4 dimensions of tone of voice. They have these spectrums. So there's funny versus serious, formal versus casual, respectful versus irreverent, and enthusiastic versus matter of fact. And if you go, I would highly suggest reading this article that I've linked here in this source material. But essentially, the Nielsen-Norman group, very well-respected consultancy practice that focuses on like user experience and other things around that. They went through a lot of refinement to come to these 4 dimensions of tone and voice. They had a bunch of words and they kind of grouped them into these different parts. And so what that says to me is that they don't capture nuance around tone of voice. They kind of capture like the big picture of what you're getting at. And that's why it's important to start here, but then, maybe add, for example, like more descriptive adjectives about your brand's personality. That being said, this is a great place to start. This is really important for that human to be able to understand your brand voice, for your brand voice to be distinctive and to speak to your target audience. So that's a big thing. For the human, it's also important to use thoughtful language. And I have a couple examples here that I'll share with you today. So the first, all of these are quick hits that will result in a high return over time when creating your content and defining content style. The first thing that's probably the most important is to be concise and cut fluff, because internet readers, they skim, they want to get their answer fast. They don't appreciate multi-syllabic words such as anti-disestablishmentarianism. It's just too long. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about content readability. But let me give you an example. So like instead of saying something like simply or just, so instead of something like simply open the app, you would just say open the app. You just kind of cut it down. And then we're talking here about strong verbs being more effective than adjectives. So for example, we're thrilled is better than we're very excited. Just gets to the point, it's more specific. And then another thing that's really important, especially considering that you're probably writing for a global audience, whether you intend to or not, whether your audience, is geographically located mostly in one place or not, people from all over might read it, and you don't want to unintentionally alienate them with your word choice. So for example, use people first language that doesn't put weight on descriptors over characteristics. So for example, you might refer to someone with a hearing disability as a person who is deaf instead of a deaf person. And then on the flip side, those are all the things you should do. These are all the things you shouldn't do. So for one, using words that insult the reader's intelligence. This isn't something I think people do on purpose, but I remember an editor that I worked with in the past who made this edit and who explained it to me, and it really stuck with me, even in terms of how I speak verbally now. So clearly, or obviously, if you say something like that, you're basically telling this person who is coming to you to learn something new that they're dumb. Obviously you should have known this. You don't know their experience. You don't know what's obvious to them. So it's better to just avoid words like that. And then there's words with ambiguous meaning. So saying something like many is a lot less clear than saying 50% of bankers or students or, whatever it is you're talking about. And then there's words that don't add value, like fortunately. The thing is, again, kind of with the first point here, you don't know that person's experience. You don't know what is fortunate to them. And it just doesn't really say anything that's useful. So stuff like that, all fair game to cut. So I have definitely alluded to this. Readability. This is something I would consider as important for humans and robots. So the Flesch reading E scale is this graphic you see here, this algorithm represented. And as you can see, there are different factors here in addition to these numbers and, how they all come together. So it's basically a measure of the average sentence length compared to the average number, of syllables per word. And in taking all these things into account, the takeaway is that you want your sentences to be short. You want your syllables in words to be few, kind of what I already said about multisyllabic words. At the Blogsmith, in our style guide, we define for writers that sentences shouldn't be more than 2 lines. If they are, that's usually a sign that they need to be split into multiple sentences, that they're a little bit too complicated. And we also define that a paragraph shouldn't be more than, I think, 3 lines as well, or 3 sentences maybe. I think it's 3 lines. I'm blanking on it now. But the point is that you are creating things that are skimmable, that have white space, that are not overcomplicated. And when it comes to style, that might go against what you think about something like a book, where it tends to be longer sentence and bigger paragraphs, but that's a different medium than what we're talking about today, which is online writing. In general, you want to aim for about a 7th to 8th grade reading level. That's just kind of like the average across the board. But that being said, this is where it helps to obviously know your audience and figure out what they respond to and what they're expecting. I would definitely recommend content optimization tools. Usually, whatever your favorite is, they do give some sort of designation for what you should do for the target reading level. So let's talk a little bit about formatting next, because this is another thing that I don't think robots can do for us yet. This is where the freelance writers and, the in-house content people of the world are still beating the robots in terms of effectiveness. So let's do a little bit of a pop quiz. I'll probably pause for about 30 seconds after this to give people time to think about it. But I want you to take a look at this example here and figure out how many instances of parallelism there are here. I will tell you after you take a few minutes, or 30 seconds, we'll say, to look through this, like step 1, step 2, step 3. That's the example. See if you can pick out the different instances of parallelism. I'll take a drink of water and we'll get back in just a moment here. And again, this is a reminder, if you haven't yet grabbed my slides, you can go to Twitter using that handle in the bottom right-hand corner, and I should have those pinned to the top for easy reference and access. Just don't skip ahead and try to get the answer before you take a second here to guess. All right, I'm going to keep moving. And I might jump back and forth here. So there were 6 different instances of parallelism, at least as far as what I could count. There might be more. I'll probably flip here. So the first one is the label for each step always has bold formatting. So that's step 1, step 2, step 3, all bold. Each step is labeled to show that it's part of the same sequence, step 1, step 2, step 3, and is followed by a colon. Specific user interface elements, which the reader is instructed to interact with, also have bold formatting. So like the settings and the reading. The word following the step number is an action verb, and the text after the colon is capitalized. So see like log, navigate, click. All right, and then finally, each bullet point ends with a period. I can't tell you how many times I have edited for a writer where, you know, they have a list and some of them have periods and one of them doesn't. Or another big thing at the Blogsmith that we define in the style guide is bullet point lists throughout the content should be consistent in terms of like if one of them, all of them have periods, then the other one, all of them should have periods. Okay, so let's keep moving here. Spelling. Obviously important in general. I'm probably going to take it from a different angle than maybe what you're expecting when you see that label. So let's revisit one of my favorite books, a very popular book in the business world, which is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. So he said, a person's name is to that person the sweetest, most important sound in any language. And if you haven't read this book, it's the context that you might need is just that it helps you do things like sales. It's a good book about networking, relationship building, how to win friends and influence people. And so how this is important to what we're talking about today is that the brands that you write for and about, the way that they spell their brand names, the way that they refer to like their products, their services, their offerings is very important to them. And it's one of those things where if you get it right, they'll either be impressed or not notice it. But if you get it wrong, then they're probably not going to trust you to take care and have attention to detail for their content moving forward. So I want to give you a couple examples that may speak to you. The first one, if you're a member of the WordPress world, everybody gets so super mad when WordPress is spelled without a capital P. There is indeed a PHP function that you can insert into your code called capital P dang it, and it automatically corrects for this whenever somebody messes it up on that website. So WordPress, it's a capital P, it's not the lowercase one. We even take this as far at the Blogsmith in our style guide to say that when we're spelling out, like, let's just say it's like WordPress.com, that you would capitalize the P even in that domain name copy that you're using. This is a super common one. I'm sure that you've seen this too, but a lot of people spell HubSpot wrong, one of the most well-known brands in the digital marketing world. So it's a capital S. People always spell it with a lowercase s. And what's really interesting about these first two examples is that they don't inform the last one, because as you can probably tell, a lot of the times in SaaS in general, when you're combining like two types of words, you're kind of like mushing them together to get a brand name. Usually the first letter of the second word part is capitalized, but that is not the case with MailChimp. So a pro tip that I can share with you is we use Grammarly premium licenses for all our writers and editors on the team. And the reason why is because Grammarly has this really cool style guide feature where you can put in custom styles, like the fact that I want WordPress to automatically correct to the capital P if somebody writes it incorrectly. So that's kind of like the reason why you might use a tool like that, and how it can be helpful on a connected team. So let's talk about visuals, and we're getting very close to the end here. Love this slide. I am almost willing to stake my life on the fact that you've seen the stock image before. And that's the point I want to make, is that free stock images are ultimately something that I think does more to alienate your audience than bring them in. It's almost better to not have images if they're going to only be free stock images. And I remember seeing this image recently when logging into a tool that I use, and it was like the hero image on their homepage. And I just thought, anybody who's seen this image before is going to be so turned off by that, just because it's like that recency, frequency. It's so recognizable. It's not distinct. It doesn't really represent anyone's brand because anybody could use it. And so the point I want to make here, for humans first, is that you need some distinctive imagery, and free stock photos aren't going to cut it. I think you'll have better results with paid stock photos. So if you have a subscription to like a premium stock photo website, those are going to be used less because they're paid. There's a gate to using them. So I'm not saying don't use those. I'm just saying try to avoid the free stock photos as much as you can. So here's what to do instead. Instead of stock photos, you could consider some of these ideas. Relevant GIFs, of course. It comes down to, is that on brand, or are you, more professional, formal? If in that case, I wouldn't use GIFs, unless maybe you're showing how to use your software tool and you have like a quick thing that you want to show that really doesn't make sense for a video. That could be a fair use case even for more of like a formal voice brand. Also, embedding YouTube videos. I think it's worth noting that it doesn't have to be a video that you created. The great thing about videos is that they increase time on page. And I think with a lot of these things here, the point I'm trying to make or share is that people learn in different ways. So there's like the copy aspect of it. That's important, but that's not everything. You need other types of media to sort of account for different learning styles. And I think especially when it comes to this next point, having statistics shown as like a graph or something like that, like a Statista embed, that's one place where you can go to get great statistics that are up to date, that are relevant to whatever industry you serve. We used to use a free Statista account, but recently upgraded to premium because you just get so much with it. It's so worth it if you're producing a lot of content. But I feel like when I see something in written copy, a statistic or like a comparison between data, it's hard for me to understand that. I'm not a super right-brained person, but if I see it as a visual where those things are compared visually, that's a lot easier for me to understand at a glance. So think about that from your target reader's point of view. We've talked about this a little bit in terms of the GIFs, but screenshot examples and annotations, especially if you're writing for something that's technical, a technical guide, being able to show people exactly where they need to go to complete a certain action is ultimately going to save you a lot of grief in terms of your customer support channels. So having documentation that shows everything step by step, easy to follow, that they can just send off to a customer, that goes beyond SEO. I mean, that's just being more efficient as a business in general. So then we have things like expert quote images. If you do something where you are interviewing experts and getting their insights, and you have like a headshot and their title and their name, and the company they work for, making something that's on brand. It doesn't have to be super complicated, put your logo, your brand colors, your typography on it. But that then is something that might compel those experts to want to share more so than if you just sort of plop their quote in, with no pomp and circumstance. And then infographics is a heavier lift than a lot of these things. But if you have an article with a lot of stats, a lot of data, a lot of steps, if it's a listicle or something like that, then creating an infographic is something that, again, speaks to the people who learn differently, but it also becomes a linkable asset. And so that's something that can go beyond some of these other images to be useful to you. Here's where it becomes more about the robots. So when you are using images, implementing them within your SEO content, you want to make sure that you're using descriptive keywords for your image labels in terms of describing that image so it's useful to screen readers and robots. And so I don't want to encourage people to just kind of plop the keyword primary or any sort of like secondary and semantic keywords in and leave it at that. My challenge to you is to weave it into a description, because at the end of the day, it's not just those search engine robots that are trying to make sense of these images. It's also people who are using screen readers, using some sort of adaptive technology so that they can engage with your content, even if they have, site issues or any other access issues. So in terms of where to incorporate these keywords with descriptions, you're going to want them to be in these different key signal areas for the different images that you add to your content. So like the image title, which I don't know how important that is, but it usually kind of autofills that when I use WordPress. So I just kind of leave it because it's autofilling based on the file name, which is really important. And then also incorporating into the alt text, that's what the screen readers read. So that's where it really needs to be descriptive. Typically within a piece of content, I'm using sort of like the SEO title for like the featured image, and then any sort of supportive images within the content, they might use other keywords. They might still incorporate that primary keyword or not, but if you do it for the featured image, that's a great start, and then the rest of them, might be incorporating other keywords. So, okay, I promise we're almost done. This is the last section, headings and titles. For both humans and robots, it is important to write compelling titles, compelling more for the human, descriptive more for the robot. And you can use, we talked about GPT-3 tools. So you can use these tools to generate ideas. I just wouldn't stop there. I think that is a great use case of a robot like assisting humans. It's just that, again, those robots do not have empathy. Titles should have empathy. These are the things that grab somebody and makes them want to continue like actually reading the content that you created. If your title isn't effective, they're not going to read it. And so another thing that you can do is use these different headline analysis tools. There's a CoSchedule one. There's this emotional headline analyzer tool, and then there's this share through one. A lot of them do more or less the same things. All of them give suggestions for how to improve a title idea. And so, maybe the workflow is like use GPT-3 to generate some ideas, ideate using your human empathy, and then plug them into these tools to see if there's anything you could do to make them better. Another thing you can consider for really both the human and the robot side is, but for the SEO title specifically, I would say, is to use these information brackets. They'll help to increase your click-through rate when used effectively. It's things like describing what it is, infographic, video, podcast. If it's something where maybe it's a review and maybe you're doing some affiliate marketing, adding a bracket that describes the discount code that they'll find within the content. That's a great way to get somebody to want to read your review over somebody else's. Talking about if you're maybe you have like a list of stats that gets updated every year. So adding a bracket so that people can see the last month and year it was updated, and to be able to tell at a glance if that's, the most relevant content in terms of what's ranking in the search engine results page for that query. And then finally, if there's like some sort of actionable takeaway that they can get, like a template or a checklist, those are all really super useful brackets to add. And then the last thought here, a lot of content optimization tools are already taking this into consideration, but let's say that you kind of have a low tech approach to keyword research, or, you want to do some of the research yourself. So using Google search features to inform content structure and subheadings. What I'm trying to say is you can use things like Google autocomplete, which is that top right corner. You type in your query and it suggests other things based on data from actual searches that people are looking for. These might be things that you would cover in a piece of content. They might also be other content ideas, complete separate content ideas. So then we have people also ask. These are really great questions to make sure to answer within your content because these are actual questions people have. They could also be really excellent featured snippet opportunities because a lot of featured snippets take the form of answering a question, but you'll want to do some additional keyword research to justify that. And then the last thing you see here are related searches. It used to be called searches related to, but now it's related searches. So this shows up at the bottom of the search engine results page after you click enter. And the same thing with people also ask, you have to click enter and then it's kind of top middle. So related searches are topics that don't incorporate the root keyword like in Google autocomplete, but they are related ideas. And so again, it might be something that you weave into your existing content structure, or they're ideas for supplementary pieces that you can then create and link to between the content that you've already created and the new piece. So with that being said, I am done. I will be hanging out in the chat really throughout this presentation, but I'll just say that I'm there now. You can certainly reach out after this to my email, maddie@theblogsmith.com. I'm also probably most active on Twitter if you want to connect there. I'm at Maddy Osman. And then just like a really short plug for my book. I've had it here this whole time. It's got some post-it notes in it because I have some images to review and some other just last minute changes to make. So this is really just a proof of the book. It's not the actual most final version, but it's going to be available on July 18th of this year. And you can pre-order the Kindle edition now. It's available on Amazon, I should say that. The print edition will be available on July 18th. So if that's the one you want, just add it to your wish list now. And I think Amazon sends out a notice, as things become available. So if you go to that, like Blogsmith -vowels.tips/book, that will take you to Amazon. And again, we've covered, I think like 4, maybe 5 different subjects that we touch on in the book, but there are 22 chapters all about style and content, visuals and SEO. So if you enjoyed the topic of this presentation, I would love if you would check out this book and use it as a reference guide for you and your team as you're creating content. But with that being said, I am done and ready to take any questions that you have. So thank you so much for joining me today.